Hi, everyone. I hope you're having a wonderful week. So, as a reminder, on Playing with Unicorns, basically try to cover everything I wish I knew when I was a starting, budding tech founder 24 years ago. And to do that, we do really three types of things. One is I share lessons learned directly in terms of how to fundraise, how venture capital works, etc. Sometimes with guests, sometimes without. Number two, I have on the show. Founders who are typically running unicorns or maybe in categories that I think are fascinating. And then number three, bring really fascinating people or authors who have a lot to share. And this is the category of today's show, where we have the pleasure of being joined by Alyssa Cohn, who's a former executive at many startups, who's now an author and executive coach. And she's going to share with us all the lessons learned that kind of culminated in a book. So, without any further ado, let's get started on today's show. Welcome to episode 31 of Playing with Unicorns, from startup to grown up with Alyssa Cohn. So, Alyssa, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for Bruce for having me. It's
Great.
great to be
So
here.
maybe before we get into the nitty gritty of all the lessons learned that founders should be aware of, maybe you should give us a little bit of your background, and then we can talk to how it led to this book, and then I'll do the book as well.
That would be great. I was in the nonprofit world, and I got very interested in why people either sort of do the work of the organization or don't. So I went off to business school to kind of think about that. I got all turned around at business school, and I exited to PricewaterhouseCoopers on their so-called fast track to partner program. And that was a great experience, but also ultimately not for me. So I ended up for doing two things actually. I found coaching and started to take coach training, but I also joined the startup world. So I was the CFO of one startup, the head of strategy for another startup, and that kind of all imploded. And I thought, okay, I'm all ready to be a coach. So I became a coach, and that was 20 years ago, one foot in front of the other, to become now what I'm doing today.
And so what was that insight? I mean, you said something about like some people want to manage, some don't want to. I mean, what's that underlying analysis or perspective that you saw?
Well, for me, I was in the nonprofit world. Specifically, I had this one role as the chief of staff to the provost at a New England college, and the provost we did strategic planning, and through that process, at some point, the provost said, "You can't manage faculty because they have tenure." And I was very young, but I thought, well, that can't be that you people will only do what you want them to do because otherwise you'll fire them. It can't be. So that's what I got very interested in figuring out what are the elements, the culture, the incentives, the motivations, the things that we can help people, catalyze inside themselves to help them work within the mission of the organization. And that's what I went to business school to kind of think about. And for 20 years as a coach, I've done a lot of observation and analysis of those
So what's the
topics.
difference between like an entrepreneur and a leader, and how does one go from being one to the other?
Mm. Well, I think a leader, I mean, to be honest with you, I think we're all leaders in one way or the other. We're all leaders in our own lives. We're leaders of the people around us. Every time you lead by example, you're being a leader. Every time you bring people along, you're a leader. Entrepreneurs are a special breed, and you know this. It's the people who can sort of see what is not there and figure out a way to make it there in terms of it being a great idea, a big idea, and also do so within constrained resources. That is a very special type of person. I would call it a very small subset of leaders.
And okay, but many people that are entrepreneurs and they're leaders in their way, probably they came up with the idea. Maybe they love product. Maybe they had a great insight. Maybe they're a technical background. They don't necessarily know how to like scale with organizations. So how do you think through how people become better managers or as the companies grow? I mean, I guess that's the topic of the book. Maybe I'll present it here briefly.
Oh, thank
Is it
you.
out yet, by the way?
Yes, it's out. Here it is, the out version. Whoops, that's upside down. Yes, October 26th it came out, and it's at all the different
And,
stages.
and
Yeah,
so, what are the? Can you summarize the insights or the lessons learned, or
yeah.
and I think it's like if you're just starting out as a founder and you tell yourself, oh, I've never really managed a lot of people. I don't, I'm maybe afraid of like wanting to grow the organization. Like, how do you think through these things, or what advice or feedback can you give to people?
Yeah, well, I think about it as a starting point inside of the framework that I wrote about in my book. So it's divided into three sections: managing you, managing them, and managing the company overall. So if I were going to give advice to any founder, it's about really think about how you need to grow in those three domains. So the first is about how do you catalyze your self-awareness? How do you recognize what your natural swing is, your natural tendency is? Then how do you manage your own psychology? The second is how do you think about managing people, as in creating psychological safety and creating a vision, but also the tactics of that: delegation, giving feedback, running meetings. And then the third is about how do you think about organizing, analyzing, understanding how you're running a business. It's amazing to me, and I'm sure you can relate to this too, when new founders, start a company, they are often excited about any progress, but not thinking about how much progress we should be making, how we can measure that, how we know if we're really gaining traction. So that's about managing the business. And I would just say that every founder, every entrepreneur has to grow in those domains in order to make it to the level of leadership that's required for large
Yeah,
scale
what I've
organizations.
seen often is, and I think you can give that example in the book, is like the founders love like playing with product or building something beautiful. But when you think of what the job of the CEO is, the job of CEO is making sure that you actually can make payroll next month, making sure you have enough money that you've raised from investors, making sure that ultimately you have revenues, attraction, et cetera, and that you're actually building a business, not just building a product. And so going from
Right.
that original insight of like I want to build something beautiful and amazing to actually having a business with like sales teams, etc., can be a big step for people. So in your experience, do most founders succeed in going from one to the other, or is there a moment where they should be whatever chief visionary or chief or chairman as opposed to CEO, or what's your perspective? Because
Right.
moving, when a founder is no longer CEO, that usually is a extraordinarily dangerous time in the life of a company.
Yeah, it's so true. It's very complicated because I would say when you say do most founders make it, I would say, as you well know, most
Yeah.
startups fail. So let's start there. So in light of the ones which are going to succeed, my experience is that the founders who recognize that they have to grow and do the difficult work, as you just said, of letting go of their product, of letting go of the fun of tinkering, the joy, even maybe they're a sales CEO, the joy of sales, and thinking about how they have to enable other people and build an ecosystem inside of the company to enable people to do all that work. If they can make that leap, the truth is that all entrepreneurs are probably capable of doing that if they're willing to grow their emotional intelligence, grow their understanding of what's actually required to build that like infrastructure within the company. I think the question is, do you want to do that? And if you don't want to do that, what's very helpful, I talked to a founder just a few weeks ago, and he said to me, listen, I finally, he's a four-time founder. And he said, listen, I finally figured out that I am great, like 0 to 50 million. But after that, it's like not for me. I take myself out of the picture. And I think actually we need to build more of a culture of that kind of self awareness. But I think that if you do want to make that leap and want to grow, then you are able to learn the
As
mentor.
a coach, by the way, when do you typically get involved, and like what's the format? Is it like once a week, once a month, or does it really vary based on the case by case basis?
Well, definitely, I would say in general, I get involved between, let's say, Series B and even like post IPO. Like I just started working with DraftKings, and they were already post
Okay.
their SPAC. I work with people with, sort of found. So I will sometimes work. There's a company I work with, for example, I work with the CEO, co-founder, the CTO, co-founder, and them together as what we, call jokingly couples counseling. Um, and then I'll also work inside of the executive team as a whole, and then one with one or two executives a little bit. So that's kind of one model. But if I'm just coaching one executive at one company, I typically meet with them, let's say every other week, and then also as needed. That's super valuable because it's like things don't just happen on a Tuesday afternoon as scheduled. It might be that something's kind of blowing up and they want to talk
Yeah.
it out on like some Thursday morning. So needing to be available for them is part of the
Okay,
role I
that
have.
makes a lot of sense. I know a number of people who started using executive coaches, and they think it's the best thing ever because you're bored they can also fire you, right? So you don't necessarily want to go to them with problems for, for perspective. And many of the advisors you've hired otherwise are like functional, like maybe someone to open doors for sales, someone to help with technology or products. And so like someone you can go to with like, everything
Right.
else, I think makes a lot of sense. And you just need to think through who plays what role in your life and in your life as an organization.
Yeah, definitely. I would just say that as a coach, I regularly, I've seen this movie before, so I have a lot to say about how to execute this kind of thing, or how to influence, or how to communicate, or how to build this kind of structure. But very often, the most valuable place that I hold for them is safe space to talk things out, to first be angry and upset, or, sort of in some way overly emotional, to be somebody who has no agenda and create safe space for them to talk themselves into where they need to be, and then make good decisions based on data and analysis as opposed to
By the
emotion.
way, Jeff Wald is says hi, excellent conversation. Every leader needs a coach,
Hi,
and
Jeff.
Alyssa is the best.
Oh, thanks, Jeff. I
So when
appreciate you
does a
too.
startup go from startup to grown up? Like when and how is that transition?
Well, that's a process, right? And I think that every time, if you think about that process, I think this is a very blunt instrument, but nonetheless, it's helpful. Series A, Series B, Series C. Every time you get that new funding round, there's in some ways a euphoria, a measure of success. But as I say in my book, and as I regularly think, this just it earns you the right to play again. Like all you have gotten is the next to the next step, and there's a new set of hurdles to overcome. So I think just like us growing into adults, the startup to grown up is a process, and I think that you as a founder have to recognize where are you in the process and what do you have to do. For example, when you're at like 50, 60 people, you better start thinking about an HR person and head of people to help you organize all those people and create management structures. By the time you're at 80 or 100, if you haven't brought that person in, then you're late, right? So there's sort of different, I think, very predictable mechanisms and predictable milestones that you need to be aware of to ensure success in that
Yeah,
new
but,
growth stage.
that actually leads me to what you mentioned before about the structure of the book. Because prior to reading the book, if you'd asked me what I was going to expect to read in the book, I would have said, "Oh, I'm going to see this is what happens after your pre-seed round. This is what happens for your seed round. This is what happens with your A round. Now you're 50 people. You're this people. You need a head of HR. This is what happens after your B round. I mean, and really, which processes you bring in when." And that could have been a potential structure for the book. Instead, the structure you chose is how do you manage yourself? How do you manage other people? How do you manage the company? Kind of with a Q&A of like, oh, what if I'm having co-founder issues? What if I'm feeling imposter syndrome? Which is fine, but it's interesting to me that you chose that structure versus more, okay, now we're Series A, what are the things you should probably be thinking about that you're not? Now that we're Series B, and so maybe you can talk about why you ended up structuring it the way you did versus the one I just exposed.
Yeah, by the way, that's a very good idea for my next book, possibly. The reason, though, is this: I'm a coach, and I became a coach for a reason. I am very passionate about personal development, your leadership journey, what it takes for you personally to transform into a leader. And that was my sort of thesis and my centerpiece of the book. So therefore, rather than think tactically about what you have to do at every stage, I was more interested in thinking about how do you need to be and how do you need to show up at every stage in the growth. And then I think also how do these three things interrelate? The thing is that people come to me with a problem with the business. They'll come to me always with interpersonal problems, but I always want to ratchet it back and sort of start with you, right? So I have this saying, the work is in you. So we have to figure out what's going on with you that maybe you're shying away from conflict. Maybe you are not sort of willfully not seeing some of the concerns in the infrastructure in the business. Let's start there, and then I can help you activate the tactics you need to be successful in all those
Um,
different domains.
okay, that makes sense. I mean, and in your experience, do you think all founders can make it? Can go from founder startup to grown up if they put the work. Like, is there's always been this saying or question. People are like, is this innate or is this not innate? If you work hard enough, can you make it? I mean, you may not want to make it because you don't like it, but if you do want to
Right,
make it, even if
right.
can you make it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question. I think that it's like, is it something that's born or made? I do think, and Randy Komisar, who was kind enough to write my forward, he and I had many conversations about this. It's like a founder has a certain, an entrepreneur has a certain set of skills, which are like actually diametrically opposed to what it takes to be a CEO. So his point of view is, of course, that's not natural. And that is also my point in the book. Leadership is a natural act. Growing from an entrepreneur to a CEO is an unnatural act. So do I think everyone can make it? I think that everybody should try if they want to. And I promise you, you'll learn a lot along the way. And if ultimately running that larger enterprise or running a post IPO company is kind of not your thing, not your jam, you'll learn a lot. You'll be a different person. You'll grow up a lot. You'll transform. And yes, at some point, it may make sense to bring a more so called professional CEO in.
What do you think are the top three, without going through every single point of the book, right? Like, if someone
Yeah.
had to have like top three takeaways of everything you've learned over the last 20 years as a coach, what would they be?
Oh my goodness, put me on the spot. Number one, you are the founder and you are the leader, and your suggestions are orders. Your inklings are orders, and certainly your orders are orders. So whatever you say has a lot of weight and measure. So be mindful of what you say. And then and I think sort of in concert with that, if when I do 360 feet when I do 360 feedback with people, your intention needs to align with your impact. So be constantly situationally aware that what you say and what you do lines up with what how you're hoping it to be. That's number one. Number two is that most people are uncomfortable giving direct feedback, having clear conversations, having candid conversations, and ultimately, sorry to say, firing people when they need to be and they wait too long. So lean into difficult conversations, lean into feedback more quickly than you think you need to. And I guess the last thing I would say is your job as a founder, as an entrepreneur, as the leader is not to know everything and do everything and be the best at everything. It's to hire the right people around you and create the ecosystem that's going to help them do the best work of their lives so that people can all win together.
Okay, so number one, be mindful of what you say because people pay attention to what you say, even if it's in jest or passing. Uh,
Right.
Number two, have difficult conversations earlier than later. If someone, maybe if you hire someone you don't think is working out, probably it's you're better off letting them go earlier rather than later. And number three, creating an environment where people can be their best selves and can thrive. I think you give
Yes.
a funny example for number one, by the way, in the book, where I think the CEO maybe said in jesting, "Oh, it would only be better and like what if we did this in the parking lot." And then I think
Yeah.
the chief of staff, the executive assistant, is like, "Okay, the next one has to be in the parking lot." And it was like middle of winter, made absolutely no sense, but like they all took it seriously, and I was like, "Wow, you do need to be mindful of what you say if you're the CEO and the founder."
Yeah, well, that actually wasn't that's something that really happened. It was actually in Texas. So it was the Christmas party. And they came back from the Christmas party. The CEO said, oh, that would only be like, it was just down the street. Oh, that would only have been more convenient if it had been in the parking lot. And, in August or September of the following year, they said, hey, would you want a tent in the parking lot? And she was like, what are you talking about? Like, we're going to have the Christmas party in the parking lot because you said you wanted it that way. So, I mean, she didn't say that, but it is amazing how your message gets, kind of, distorted as you go. So
Yeah,
just be,
Indian telephone or whatever it's called.
yeah, exactly, exactly.
Jagar Budev, and I apologize if I butchered your name, is saying it's excellent conversation. Another important factor for founders is a fiduciary responsibility of capital. What is your experience with founders regarding this?
Well, I would say this. So my experience of entrepreneurs and founders is that they're very tied to the identity of their companies. They want to do right, obviously, by their companies. They want that to be the companies to be successful. They also feel a strong responsibility to be a good steward of capital and to be a good steward of their people. Like I've experienced many acquisitions where the acquisition was going to be great for the founder and not as good for the people. And either they turned it down or they fought really hard for their people. So I think that their role as a board member and as of course as a fiduciary, what I think about, what I interact with founders mostly more about is about how committed they are to their company success and also to their people. Surprisingly so, when we think about kind of the meme of the Silicon Valley, they only care about money, they only care about themselves. My experience is the entrepreneurs I work with care a lot about the people in the
Yeah, no,
company.
my truth is the same, where people that buyers maybe want to only give the earn out of the founders, but instead they distribute it to all their employees and to the investors for RADA
Right,
and stuff like that, because it's the right thing to do
right.
as opposed to the selfish thing to do. So most people, I think, are well intentioned and mean well and really see themselves as wanting to make the world a better place. So the show Silicon Valley and on HBO try to make fun of it. But the funny thing is, I actually think that most people take it literally and believe it and believe in the mission of what they're building.
Yeah, I really agree with you. I mean, also we see these little exceptions in the news, on the front page of the news, and so it kind of creates this mythology. Yeah, my experience is that they really care about all those things that you
Yeah.
just mentioned.
Yeah, no, and you're right. Like, what is the news going to be reporting on? Like the most sensationalist, cases, or it's going to
Right.
be Theranos or
Salacious
whatever,
things.
like
Right.
cases of fraud and
Right.
as opposed to the norm, which is true by the way of life in general. And I think most people in the world, if not just entrepreneurs, are well intentioned, and most things are great, and yet you follow the news and everything's like all negative all the time, which creates this weird cognitive dissonance, which is why I highly recommend
Right.
that people don't actually follow any news whatsoever. I don't read newspapers, I don't read The Economist, I don't look at TV news. It's all negative all the time. Instead, read books. They're more insightful. And actually, so what compelled you to write a book? Is that your first book, by the way?
This is my first book, and I would couple of things. I would walk into a new scenario, a new situation, and I would say to the founders or the executive team, sort of, how do you think about holding? How do you regularly do you have all hands? And they'd say, well, we don't really have all hands very often. Or I would say to the founder, where's your executive team? How often do they meet? He'd say, well, what's an executive team? So, like, I just found there were a lot of things that I experienced over and over again, and I felt like I wish I had a book to hand them. And I thought I wanted to write that book. The second thing I would say is that I, like everybody, read Ben Horowitz's book,
Hmm.
The Hard Thing About Hard Things. And I really liked that book. At first, I was a little off put, by the tone a little bit, but my founders would talk about how much they got out of it. So I read it again and I realized what a great book that was. But it really was like just from Ben's experience. And I thought I had something to say, having seen, 20 years of coaching and really 15 years focused on founders and entrepreneurs. I felt like I wanted to bring something that was more, let's say, like sort of well
I
rounded
don't
than
look. I
just
agree.
sort of
I
Ben's
like the
experience.
hard things about hard things, but like it doesn't need to be that way. It's not all about like grit, tenacity, and eating glass until you make it,
Yeah.
and being on the verge of like bankruptcy and failure at every single moment. Uh, the
Yeah. He's got one point of view.
it's
Yeah.
it's one experience, and it can be, and obviously grit and tenacity is part of the startup culture and experience, but it doesn't need to be the entire experience. So no, I totally agree with
Right.
that. Actually, what you point out is
Yeah.
kind of the reason I started playing with unicorns. Is I was getting the same questions over and over and over again from founders, like, "What is a good deck? How do I fundraise? How do I come up with new business ideas? How do I evaluate if my idea is any good?" And after I've repeated the same thing 500 times, I'm like, maybe I should create the one definite repository of that information, and then I can direct people to it. And then we can have a more advanced conversation rather than like just repeating what I say over and over and over again. Way more scalable.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I love that, and I love that you've created this sort of dynamic environment. So after I wrote the book, what I also did was I interviewed 11 founders in my book to really hear their perspective on various topics around their own growth in certain areas. So about like
Yeah.
Michelle Romano, I talked about her experience with her co-founder. I talked to Dennis Crowley of Foursquare about delegation. I talked to Chip Conley about building culture. So I love those conversations, and I realized that's the dynamic part of sort of all this building the work of knowledge. So I just started my own podcast called From
Oh.
Startup to Grown Up. Jeff Wall, the new edition with Jeff Wald is coming out just next week. So get ready for that, Jeff Wald. Because I really love the idea of founders talking to each other and also to your point, continuing to create this like beautiful library that you can turn to when you have
So what's
questions.
next for you? Is there another book in your future? Is just being more of an executive coach? Like, and what did you think of the process of writing a book? Like, was that difficult? Did it take you a long time to like write it, to find an editor and all that? Like, because I mean, you're coming at this from a
Yeah,
new
well,
perspective, like, and never having done that before.
yes, it was actually very challenging. It was challenging to kind of get over my mental chatter and difficult chatter about just getting sitting down to write the book. Once I kind of got in my head, I'm going to write this book one way or the other. COVID was actually very helpful because COVID grounded all of us. And so I just thought, if I don't write this book during COVID, I'm going to be mad at myself. So it all fell into place. I found my publisher very easily. It took me only 6 months to write the book because I had really thought about it for like 10 years. And I would say that once I found the structure for the book, I'm not going to say it was effortless, but it went on pace. I never had like, oh, writer's block or difficulty because I really worked it out in my head what I wanted to say. So that's the process of writing the book. What I'm really curious about now is what may come from the book. I'm excited about my podcast and interviewing more and more founders and people who've got to take on again that personal development journey that it takes to go from founder to CEO. And then we'll see. Maybe I'll write the book that you just mentioned. Maybe we'll write it together, Reese.
Cool. So anything we didn't
Yeah.
cover that we should talk about or that we should cover?
I think we should start with the scripts. So in the back of the book, I have 14 scripts to help everybody get their mouth around the words for difficult conversations, delicate conversations, and they have to do with how do you give difficult feedback? How do you announce bad news? How do you even have one-on-ones? How do you have a career conversation with somebody and you don't even know exactly what they do? All of those things together are like delicate or
Yeah.
difficult. Certainly, how do you fire someone? Because that's the thing that people have the most trouble with. And I wrote those because when I have my meetings with the entrepreneurs I coach, the founders, CEOs I coach, will finally get to the place where they're like, okay, I'm ready to have that conversation. Okay, great. And then they're like, I don't know what to say. So then I'll say, well, why don't you just say? And then I land what I think they should just
Yeah.
say. And they're writing it down furiously and taking notes. And I thought about that as halfway through my book. And I thought, well, I'm going to write down those scripts because
Yeah,
people have found them
in
really
fact,
valuable.
actually, I think one way to use the book because it does have kind of this Q&A structure of like, if this is what you're dealing with, this is how you should think about it. Is actually it doesn't necessarily even need, from my perspective, need to be read linearly. It's more like, what is the problem you're currently facing, and let's go read about that problem. Like whatever the co-founder conversation or an employee that's underperforming that you need to let go, or cultural issues, etc. And so I like the idea, and actually I saw the strips and they're really really good as like both conversation starters and then like how to manage the conversation when it gets going.
Yeah, well, thank you for saying that. Fabrice, I would love to know from you, as from your experience as a multiple, entrepreneur yourself and also investor, what resonated for you for the most from my book?
Hmm. The To me, it's what I just said. It's like, oh, these are issues that people have that they need to deal with. It's interesting. Like, I never suffered from imposter syndrome, so like the entire like you need to manage you. It was like, no, of course I'm an extraordinary founder and I belong where I am, and people should be so lucky to follow me. So, delusional self confidence and optimism is something I've seen in many founders. So for some people, it's like armor. They're really insecure and they project it. Some people actually really believe it, but the a lot of the insights on if you need to have a difficult conversation to have it sooner rather than later, I think is completely valuable. I think no one does this right. Like you always wait too long. You always wait too long to let someone go, and in order to face like if something's bothering you, you need to address it immediately. And that radical honesty, transparency, yeah, it's things that people don't do. And then the the advice on okay, now is the time you should get a HR manager. I think people always do that too late, right? Like by the time they hire a HR manager, they probably could have used one for like a year. The start bringing in some
Totally.
processes as you as you grow, makes a lot of sense. Even though as a founder, I'm like abhorrent by default or in nature of like anything that feels like is going to slow me down. Like I can get it done now. Like why add
Right.
processes? It's really annoying, but
Yeah.
given that we as
Yeah.
founders are not scalable, it's really important that we start actually finding ways that we can delegate and scale ourselves. No, so the
Right.
all the little advice for different pieces, I think, made a lot of sense to me.
Oh, that's cool. That's good to hear.
Perfect. Well, for all the founders out there, go buy the book from Startup to Grown Up. It's available. And Alyssa, thank you for joining us today. And everyone in the audience, next week we're going to have the founder of Shippo, who's this extraordinary female founder who's built this $2 billion company. And so it'll be an amazing conversation. So thank you for joining us, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks, Reese.